Well, hello everyone. This is my analysis of John Keats's poem, The Eve of St Agnes, stanza 23 in particular, and this is as part of HSC Advanced English Module A Textual Conversations. So we're also going to be comparing it with the film Bright Star by Jane Campion. Now, for starters, it's slightly unusual that we are analysing this poem in the first place because it's not actually a poem, it's a single stanza from a poem. It's actually just one stanza out of 42 stanzas in the Eve of St Agnes. It's a very long narrative poem. It's a poem about a young woman who loves her family's enemy. The young woman's name is Madeline, and her family's enemy is Porphyro. And in this particular stanza we're going to be looking at, which is stanza 23, she longs silently for her love in her bedchambers, unaware that he is actually in the room with her. But it is unusual that the syllabus writers have dictated that this particular stanza is an important one for us to study as part of Module A. I think that personally they would have done better to allocate us the opening of John Keats's poem Endymion, which is also quoted in Bright Star. But they've chosen this one, and really the main reason they have chosen it is because it is quoted in the film. So let's have a look at the clip in which this stanza 23 from the Eve of St Agnes is actually quoted.
What did you think of the Odyssey?
I'm yet part way through it. But, I've read all Mr. Keats has written.
Have you?
How went the taper as she hurried in? Its little smoke in pallid moonshine died. She closed the door. She panted all akin to spirits of the air and visions wide.
And what, Miss Braun, did you make of Paradise Lost?
Oh, I liked it.
So this scene revolves around Fanny's ability to appreciate poetry and express her understanding of poetry. She's being interrogated by Mr. Brown there, who's in fact setting up a bit of a trap for her for later on in the film. And I guess the reason this particular stanza is meaningful in this scene is that it kind of aligns with Madeline's experience in the Eve of St Agnes, in that both Madeline and Fanny are silenced by tradition. Fanny in this scene, though she is sort of speaking and defending her understanding, is being somewhat oppressed by the traditional Mr. Brown, who probably doesn't think much of her ability as a woman to understand poetry. Similarly, Madeline in the Eve of St Agnes is silencing herself because she doesn't want to break the spell, as we're about to discuss. So that's why I guess we're studying this poem. I still think that Endymion would have been a better choice, but it's an interesting thing to look at nonetheless. So let's talk about this concept of the Eve of St Agnes. So this is referring to the feast of St Agnes, who was a Christian saint, and that feast is held on the 21st of January, which means that the Eve of St Agnes is the 20th of January, my birthday. But moving on from that quickly, let's talk about St Agnes. So St Agnes was the patron saint of girls, chastity, virgins, and in fact rape victims as well. That's actually going to have an interesting relevance to this particular stanza 23 that we're looking at in our unit. And with this feast of St Agnes and the Eve, the night before, there were certain folklore traditions associated with it. It was believed that if certain rites were performed before going to bed, young women could see visions of their future husbands. And those rites are somewhat ambiguous in the poem and in tradition, but things like going to bed without supper, I think doing the rosary, transferring pins from one cushion to another. There was also something about making sure that you were always looking upwards. And it seems to be implied in this stanza as well, keeping silence, or at least Madeline's taking the whole thing so seriously that she doesn't want to make any sound. So there's also a painting there by John Everett Millay, which is of this specific scene where she's preparing to go to bed. She's taking off her outer layers of clothing there. And this is the situation in which we find Madeline in stanza 23. So let's talk about the language. Let's work through this stanza and just unpack the meaning, and then we'll try and draw out some concepts and ideas. So the stanza begins, "Out went the taper as she hurried in." So that's a taper is a candle. So her candle is blown out, and she is rushing as she rushes into her room. Its little smoke in pallid moonshine died. Pallid means pale and sickly. So the candle is blown out in amongst this pallid moonshine streaming into the room. The candle has died. This whole first two lines really creates a sense of pathetic fallacy. The whole scene's gaining an unhealthy air with this pallid moonshine. You know, it's not bright, sparkling, it's not warm moonshine, it's pallid, pale and sickly. She closed the door, she panted, all akin to spirits of the air and visions wide. Akin as in related. So this figure, Madeline, is being connected to sort of figures of mythology and folklore here. That's a very Keatsian thing to do, as we know from the poems we've studied in the past. No uttered syllable, or woe betide. So she's afraid to speak in case it breaks the ritual. She's not going to utter any syllable, or woe betide her. You know, bad things will happen. But to her heart was voluble. So Madeline is not speaking, but her heart is. Her heart is talking readily and fluently to her itself. Her heart's speaking within her, even though she's too afraid to speak verbally. Paining with eloquence her balmy side. Balmy here means sweating. Shows how intense the emotions are that Madeline is feeling in this scene. As though a tongueless nightingale should swell her throat in vain and die heart stifled in her dell. And a dell is a small wooded valley, and Keats's final image here is interesting in that it echoes the ending of Ode to a Nightingale, where a nightingale is flying through these valleys off into the distance. So that's the literal meaning and somewhat of the figurative meaning of this stanza as well. So she's gone into her room. She's quite emotionally excited, and she sort of doesn't dare speak for her hope that she'll be able to perform this ritual and get a vision of Porphyro, who she loves. Now this stanza is full of very emotive language. Hurried, died, panted, woe betide, paining, die, stifled. All these verbs in particular are creating a lot of overwrought emotion, which is not just a convention of romanticism, but it's also somewhat Gothic, which is almost considered a subgenre of romanticism. This intense emotional experience that came out of characters' situations, and it was considered to be the most genuine way to react to an artistic experience in particular was through the emotions, not through the rational senses. So this was emphasized a lot in Romanticism, and the the very sort of mythical aspect of this scene creates somewhat of a Gothic flavor to it as well. Now, the final two lines of the stanza are very interesting because there's actually a bit of an allusion going on here. It talks about the fact that Madeline is panting, but she's remaining silent, she's not speaking. Her heart within her is speaking, and it's as though a tongueless nightingale should swell her throat in vain and die heart stifled in her dell. So it's like a nightingale, a bird without a tongue, wants to sing, and it's swelling its throat as if it's about to sing, but it can't, and it dies stifled, having not been able to express itself in that way. Now, this is actually an allusion to the Greek myth of Philomel, and it's quite a dark myth. It's quite a dark allusion for Keats to bring into this story, which is meant to be a story of romance, a story of young lovers who are, desperate to see each other. So Philomel in Greek myth was raped by her brother-in-law, who in fact afterwards cut out her tongue so she couldn't report this crime. Now, Philomel gets her revenge on her brother-in-law with the help of her sister, and they're trying to escape his wrath, and the gods, in fact, transform her into a nightingale so that she can escape him. So she is, in the Greek myth at the end, a tongueless nightingale. This is an interesting depiction for Keats to bring in here, because in the broader context of the whole poem, Porphyro is at this moment breaking into Madeline's family home, and it gives him sort of this dark and sinister quality. I mean, in a sense, it's being implied that he's being compared to a rapist here, which is pretty disturbing. But it's, again, drawing on Romanticism's concern with the difference between ideals and realities. Madeline has idealized this man Porphyro, who she wants to have visions and dreams about, but the real thing is a little bit more sneaky. I mean, he's sneaking into this building to steal her away without her knowledge. So that's probably why Keats has brought in this slightly disturbing reference to Greek myth. And of course, it also is an interesting counterpoint to the fact that St Agnes was also the patron saint of chastity, virgins, and rape victims. There's a sort of a weird subversion of Madeline participating in these rituals of St Agnes when Keats is describing this allusion to Philomel. We'll talk a little bit about the structure of this poem as well. So what we've actually got here is a very specific rhyme scheme and meter. It's actually what's called a Spenserian stanza. So it starts off with 8 lines in iambic pentameter. That means 10 syllables to a line, grouped in pairs of unstressed followed by stressed syllables. Da-dum, 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 da-dum is iambic pentameter. And then it's finished off with a final line of iambic hexameter. So rather than 5 pairs of syllables, the final line has 6 pairs of syllables, which is why it's formatted as being slightly offset to the left. It also follows a very specific structure, a rhyme scheme: A, B, A, B, B, C, B, C, C. It's kind of an interlocking rhyme scheme. And really, apart from just the, I guess, exhibiting his technical mastery in following this very specific structure for 42 stanzas, what Keats is kind of doing here is he's evoking the Elizabethan era. The painting on the left there is of Edmund Spenser, and he developed this Spenserian stanza somewhere in the 1590s, and it kind of evokes the Elizabethan era. It's like Keats is casting the reader's mind back to a former time, to this time of, not quite the knights and ladies of the medieval period, perhaps, as it was in La Belle Dame sans Merci, but certainly to an older and more traditional time. It gives it this kind of fairy tale quality. Let's now watch a couple of scenes and kind of compare and contrast what Jane Campion did in her film Bright Star, how she might have mirrored, aligned with, or collided with some of the concepts in Keats's poems.
No letter.
Not today.
My love. It's this love. I shall never tease about it again. So sore, I believe one could die of it.
So here we have Campion's depiction of the lovesick Fanny. She's, longing to be with Keats, who's separated from her at the moment. And it does mirror the intense emotion and longing felt by Madeline in the Eve of St Agnes. That desire for her love. She's there in her bedchamber as well, so there's some pretty similar imagery and scenario going on here. And Campion's costuming of Fanny, she's dressed all in white there, sort of emphasizes this innocent discovery. Fanny's being depicted in a very virginal costuming in this scene, which mirrors the character of Madeline well. And there's this sort of this discovery of lovesickness, and it hurts so much I think I could die of it. Is Fanny's comment there? So it does seem to mirror somewhat her experience in this scene. However, there's some interesting collisions as well, because wherein the original Eve of St Agnes, the male character Porphyro sort of is this assertive figure who's going to achieve this romantic conquest. In Bright Star, Campion depicts the way that both the male and female characters long for each other and are both unable to kind of achieve their desires. Let's have a look at this scene.
Mr. Keats?
So it's a touching scene and heavily symbolic. So as I said, it kind of collides with Keats's depiction of gender in the Eve of St Agnes. Unlike Porphyro, Keats is constrained by boundaries of appropriate behaviour, and he cannot seek direct connection with his love, Fanny. Keats is, restricted to his own room. The wall symbolises this quite effectively. The characters are not willing to transgress the moral code of the time and, run off together or elope or, spend time in each other's rooms. This wouldn't be appropriate. And it's a sign that Campion is depicting somewhat of the realism of that early 19th century period, in contrast to this kind of romantic, male-dominated flight of fancy that Keats depicts in the Eve of St Agnes. Campion's got some really well mirrored close-ups there of Keats and Fanny sort of pressing against the wall, and the symbolism of that wall in between them creates a real feeling of intensity and longing, which matches the intensity of longing of Madeline in the Eve of St Agnes. But in this case, as we said, both characters have this barrier in front of them, and Keats pushing his bed up against the wall kind of has this, it's a very emotional gesture with a certain hopeful futility to it that I think mirrors Madeline's actions in the Eve of St Agnes quite well, in that she's, desperately hoping through these rituals just to get a look at Porphyro, not even necessarily be with him. So we get a similar sense from Keats's actions here. This scene of Keats moving his bed is echoed later in the film with Fanny pushing her bed up against the wall to be closer to him. And this is also when we, at this stage, the audience knows that Keats is very ill. He has tuberculosis, will quite possibly die in the same way as several of his family members have. We can see in this shot here some low lighting and candles burning low, symbolizing death. And it's a simple and effective shot that helps to create that sense of longing the characters have for each other. One last scene I wanted to look at is Keats and Fanny's silent farewell.
Not a word.
So it's certainly one of the most poignant scenes in the film. And once again, it sort of breaks down the sort of gender roles that are established in the original poem by Keats. So like Madeline, both Keats and Fanny must remain silent in the face of circumstances beyond their control. Madeline in the original poem doesn't want to speak for fear that she might break the spell of those rituals of the Eve of St Agnes. Keats and Fanny here are remaining silent for fear of, I guess, just becoming overcome by their emotions in this parting. The characters' stillness in this scene really communicates restraint. They're moving in very still and almost rigid ways, but their longing is emphasized by their intense, steady gaze throughout this scene. Lots of lingering looks. And in collision with the Eve of St Agnes, which actually ends, I guess, somewhat positively for Madeline and Porphyro in that they leave her home together, they sort of run off together, the characters here do not leave together. So again, it's emphasizing, I guess, the realism of Campion's depiction. This is, after all, a biopic. She's telling the real story of Keats, which did not end particularly happily. So in summary, the Eve of St Agnes stanza 23. An unusual choice for this unit, but let's make what we can of it. It does capture the overwrought emotion of romanticism, which is also depicted in Bright Star. Bright Star is a film full of emotional rawness and heavy emotional reactions, so it sort of matches this poem well in that way. The poem evokes ancient Greek mythology to both heighten the fairy tale quality of the poem by sort of having this mythical feeling, but also when you look at the actual Greek myth that is being evoked, it creates a sense of disappointing reality, that Porphyro is not the fairy tale figure that Madeline's made him into in her imagination. He's actually a bit sneaky and devious. There's a bit of a dark sense to his portrayal. Now, the poem demonstrates typical 19th century gender perspectives, and those are subverted by Campion, who depicts not just female characters longing, but also male characters as well. And on that point, it emphasizes romantic longing, which was culturally constrained, which was a concept that interested Campion. Madeline is constrained by her gender and the situation of her family. She has to wait for the male figure to approach her. And both Keats and Fanny's romantic longing is culturally constrained by factors like socioeconomic status, the fact that Keats doesn't have the money to marry Fanny in a stable way, the fact that her family is sort of upwardly mobile and wants to marry up. So that concludes the analysis, and I hope that helps to clarify why it's in the unit and how it connects with the film.